So, Tim, you come back from Afghanistan, your deployment, and then you discharge from the army. What made you come to that decision?
Well, remind me if I said this. We're in part 3 right now. Is that correct? This is going to be the third one.
Yes,
Okay. Well, firstly,
yes,
we
we
need
are,
to
mate.
acknowledge the listeners right now. Part 3. If you come this far, well bloody done. Okay. Awesome work. You've put up with Adam and myself, and we really hope that you get some value out of this. But before we go forward, I just want to show gratitude to the people listening. It means a lot to share this with you. Now, Adam, like I was saying, please remind me if I said this, but I just come back from Afghanistan with Bravo Company. All right. And before that, I had a lot of rumors sitting above my head that were very untrue, but told by a very convincing sergeant that knew how to character assassinate people. And for a long time there, I was treated like a ghost on base. People wouldn't talk to me. Although my closest brothers still would, there wasn't any sort of like, when I joined this platoon, my sergeant was telling me there was guys saying, he's this, he's that. And this sergeant showed a rare courage and said, you know what, let's just give him a go. Okay. And by the end of that deployment to Afghanistan in 2009, I had guys coming up to me saying, we're sorry, we believe the rumors. Because Tim, you are more than capable of doing this. And you did it better than most. In fact, there's something actually quite fearless about you. And it meant so much to be known. It really did. I was willing to spend the rest of my life in that space because I felt known. And then it was the end of deployment. Piss up. Great. I paid my money. I think it was something like $100. And we were going to be on a boat in Sydney Harbour. Great. No worries. I also knew that there was going to be strippers on that boat. And the agreement I had with my wife is I don't do anything away from her that I do with her. And she knows that. But I'm a big boy. If they're up one end of the boat, if the strippers are up one end of the boat, I'm just going to be at the other enjoying a beer, right? Anyway, it turns out that some of the wives of the partners called the CO of 2 Commando, and as they say, shit rolls downhill. The major had to can the strippers on the boat, so all of the company was pulled out. And you have to understand, Special Forces soldiers, we don't need orders. We get very good at understanding the commander's intent. And it was very clear this commander was really pissed off that he couldn't have strippers on the boat. And after tearing everyone shreds and how pissed off he was, he goes, right, who here has got a problem with strippers? And it was literally, I remember it to this day, it was like another part of me was standing to one side and it had my hand on my shoulder saying, and he was kind of laughing when he said it, he was saying, Tim, there's never a convenient time to be yourself, and guess what? You got like 3 seconds to do something about it or forever hold your peace. And then boom, my hand went up. And it wasn't anything spectacular. I just put my hand up. I didn't say anything, but it was like kind of Moses through the Red Sea. Everyone turned and looked. And even the officer sort of was a bit shocked that someone actually put their hand up. And I could see that there was an amount of respect for that act, but I could also see that, courage comes in a lot of different forms. I was in a bunch of guys that were willing to fight and die for their country. Okay. But did they have the courage to, say their truth? Now, obviously not everyone's, got their own opinion about strippers, but it just showed me that there is different kinds of courage. And, there's plenty of guys came up to me afterwards and says, I wanted to put my hand up too. And I'm like, yeah, but you fucking didn't. So anyway, 2 weeks later, I get my ass transferred to another company. And, they said it was for this reason, that reason, but I'm like, nah, the cool kids didn't get transferred. I got transferred. And this company was about to be deployed to Afghanistan, which I was happy about because I love deployments. I love proving myself in the outside the wire. But then I get there and one of the officers and some of the NCOs come around me and say, we've effing heard about you, C word. And I'm like, shit, well, I know what's going to happen next. I know I'm going to be the first guy through the door, which doesn't sound like much, but first guy through the door is the guy that's going to get shot first, right? And I'll get a really good write up saying he was a good soldier until he got shot. But, I'm not scared of dying, but I don't want to die for a bunch of people that don't care about me. You know, I want to be missed by more than just, you know, my family. So I'm in this situation where I thought I had a job for the rest of my life. And I'm like, if I stay here, that's going to be me agreeing with their sense of my worth. Okay. And I'm like, I don't know what the fuck I'm going to do now, but I'm worth more than that, you know? And, you know, I had wife, kids at that stage. And, you know, I just had to walk away and I had to admit defeat. First time in my life, had to admit defeat. And that really took a toll. So the next day I put my discharge in and I just sort of, you know, fishtailed out of the defense, you know, with an amount of undiagnosed PTSD, because other guys in the unit had said that they had problems when they were discharging, and they made it very obvious that they were punishing people that for saying that there are problems within the unit. And I remember I was halfway through a letter saying that there are these problems here and this is what's going on. And my mate grabbed me and says, Tim, do not do that. They fucked over this guy and that guy and that guy. If you want to be fucked over, you write that letter. But if you don't, and if I was you, I wouldn't. And I'm like, yeah. And I just caved. I couldn't fight the army. Yeah, it was very demoralizing. I felt like I'd failed. Felt like nothing I'd done up until that point mattered. So, you know, I just sort of limped back home to Brisbane. And what does any confused commando do but open his own boot camp business, you know? And, you know, that was quite enjoyable. That was semi-successful. I ran a good, you know, workshop, and people appreciated the energy I brought to it. But I was of the opinion that once I got out, I'd get a job and everything would be fine. I couldn't have been further from the truth, because there was this background sort of noise of some unresolved mental and physical injuries. And I just thought I'll keep going and ignore it, because that's what normally worked for me in the past, take a bunch of painkillers. And on this occasion, you know, I'd have to take, you know, I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but I oddly knew, I knew exactly what bottle shops had what on their shelves, and I knew everyone's names who worked there, and I knew their shifts. So that tells me I drank a lot of alcohol, even though to me it just seemed normal. But what was happening, I was out of balance, and I didn't consciously know it, but subconsciously I was trying to balance it out with substance, you know. So I was, here's what I was telling myself, Adam. And the way I describe it is like this, you know, for us blokes, we think of, you know, the way I describe wellness to blokes is, think of wellness like a roof supported by 4 walls. Okay. The walls in your house. And us blokes, we have a show wall, the wall that everyone can see. And on that wall is all the things that we can do. All right. Let's say I was a mechanic, you know, look at what I can do. I fix cars. I help people go to work. You know, if I wasn't there fixing cars, then they couldn't go to work and this country would grind to a halt, you know. So, you know, if you tell me there's any kind of problem in any other wall in my house, I'll just redirect your attention to all the things I can do. You can't tell me I've got a problem. Look at all the stuff that I do and other people value me for. As long as that wall is okay, I'm okay. And we just ignore the impact the crumbling, you know, emotional states have on all the people we care about. So I experienced firsthand what it is to live in the idea that everything's okay, provided I can do my job, you know. And it wasn't an easy way out of that, because I just sort of bounced out of the army and I wasn't aware of any services that were available for veterans until we went to this, I think it was some sort of fete and the RSL had a stand there. And my then wife asked, any things available. And then we found out, you can actually get counseling and psychology and all that sort of stuff. So those options became available. But, what I discovered, Adam, was that, not all healers, and when I say healers, I'm talking about GP, psychologists, counselors, they're not all born equal. In fact, some are very average and some do more harm than good. And I just was in this place where I got really dark, and I'm like, I am the strongest guy I know, and I am struggling to go through this medical system. Surely there's thousands of others struggling with this, and then it sort of dawned on me, Tim, maybe you've been put here to find a way for you, and then you're going to be able to find a way for others. And that was a hell of a thing, because then I told myself, look, it doesn't matter if it takes a week, a month, a year, a decade. If I can find a way forward in that time, that's potentially the amount of time I'm going to be able to save other people in that same place. And I wish somebody was there for me, when I was going through that. So I need to be that person for someone else, And so when I started coming out of, the deep effects of my PTSD, I then started turning my attention to helping others. And that happened in a very curious way. I was a boot camp instructor, right? That's all I was qualified for, really. And the charity Mates for Mates needed some relief staff to cover a few shifts. And I go in there and, I take my job pretty seriously. And I also charge, a lot, probably 3 times what the average PT charges, because I know my value and I know what I can contribute. And I'm in there and there's nothing going on. And I'm like, I could sit here and collect a paycheck, or I could get in communication and start talking to some people. So I literally open a random door in one of the offices, and I get talking to this lady, and she seems nice enough. As she's someone who worked there. I mean, the whole place was freaking empty. And I'm like, this place is empty. I'm getting paid. Is there anyone I could make a phone call to? And she's like, yes, there is. And she gives me 3 people to call. And I call up, and I met with quite a bit of resistance to start with, because I know what it is. There's quite an amount of distrust in the veteran space, because you don't know who's your friend and who's not. They might be friendly, but they could be working for the insurance company who's trying to screw you over. And they really do. They treat you like you're a freaking liar. And it's so repulsive to me as a veteran who served and did it with integrity. And then, you have all this integrity drilled into you, and then you're in the civilian world and they just assume that you're lying. They assume, and that really does your head in. So you don't know who to trust. So, once I could speak, because I could understand the position they were in, I could meet them where they were. And if I could get through the first 3 to 5 minutes of this prickly conversation of what the hell are you doing and why are you calling me and who are you, then I literally couldn't get off the call for 45 minutes, because there was a connection there, right? And these people started coming in, and I started doing training with them. And I just started volunteering my time. This was just something that I was so connected to, and I felt so great being able to help people. Now, I use the word help 8+ years ago. I don't use it now, and I'll explain why that is later. But I really genuinely felt I was helping these people. They would come in because they had a connection to me via the phone. But then as more and more people came in, I noticed that they were coming in, they could hang out and talk to me, but they weren't doing it with anyone else. And there was only so many people I could talk to, right? So then I'm like, you know what? Maybe we need to start a group here. Okay. And I tried groups and it wasn't working. And then I'm like, how about we start a men's group? And you know what? It took me about 6 weeks to create a culture the way I wanted it to. But then after that, it just started snowballing. And Mates for Mates went from an old Queenslander essentially to this really big building on the back of the success that these programs were creating. Now, it wasn't without controversy. There was a lot of vocal females at the time saying this is prejudice, this is wrong, this is unequal. And you'd make opportunities for these people to attend certain groups, and they just simply wouldn't. And I kind of discovered that the people that often complain the most are the ones that just all they want to do is have their voice heard and complaining, and they don't actually want to participate. So if you're participating and complaining, I'll listen. If you're not engaging, you're just complaining, you're not on my radar. Although, people tend to overreact. The first complaint they get, let's change everything. So I was really glad that I had the right management above me to back me up when I said this really needs to happen, because the amount of good that it's doing is far outweighing any potential harm or any complaints. So yeah, this was like this runaway success that started. And I also started creating, without any experience, some powerful veteran programs like Fairweather Wednesdays, I used to call them. We had a wealthy donor supply a boat, and I would take people out on the boat with a very specific sequence of events. This wasn't just zooming around the bay. I made a point of collecting pre and post data of these events, because you can argue with me, but you can't argue with the data. So you can't argue with me. But the goal of these programs was to not just zoom around the bay. The goal was to improve quality of sleep, because I noticed a classic sign of disconnect was quality of sleep suffered. And if you can reconnect somebody, quality of sleep improves, and they can start sort of healing themselves. Now, I'm not saying that that's a healing modality on its own. I think it's certainly complementary. But what I did, and what I could see the marine environment could offer, was that when you're out on the water, you could see the horizons. So your visual sense of threat could be relaxed because you could see everything. There was no more audio noises affecting a strung out nervous system is highly sensitive to noises. So if you've got a bunch of veterans and they're a bit strung out in their nervous system, you pop a balloon and see how they react. Loud noises aren't friends of people with a strung out nervous system. And I don't recommend you pop a balloon around a bunch of veterans. Okay. Jungle tip. But yeah, so these programs, my goal was to save, because I had this crazy number in my head. I thought, well, we've lost about 40 guys to bullets in Afghanistan, and we've lost 10, maybe 20 times that amount to suicide. Wouldn't it be great? I would die happy if I could save 40 guys from suicide. And creating these programs, but also seeing that pain's ultimate goal is to isolate somebody, make them feel alone. So if you feel like you're the only person going through something, that doubles down. It's a pain no one can really handle. And then we don't seek help because we feel like we don't want to burden anybody. Especially in defense, we feel like if we need help, that somehow means we're weak. And if we're weak, we'll let the team down, and we'll die before we let the team down. So, I talking to these guys, I kind of had to reorientate them to what it is to get healing. And I said to them, look, if you saw me in the gym, would you consider me weak? Even if you could bench more than me? No, I'm in there, I'm working out because I have a desire to be stronger. All right. That same desire to be stronger wants me to improve the quality of my sleep, wants me to find a good psychologist, find a good counselor. I want all of me to be stronger, not just my bench press. And so doing that and creating environments where healing could take place. And when I say environments, that's easier said than done. An environment where that's healing, you can leave your house and go there without even thinking. But if you think, oh, geez, I've got to go to the psychologist today, the day before I'm nervous, and on the day I'm like, shit, right? So you want to, you've got a good environment when it's easy and effortless, to go from your door there. And that's no mistake. So I've literally done a lot of work with psychologists to create spaces that are so they're aware of what it is to go, of all the things they don't know about, because there's a lot of things stopping clients firstly asking help and secondly going from their door to the psychologist's door. All right. So if you can be aware of those things that aren't on the spreadsheet and you don't know about it until you've walked that path, then you can actually meet them where they are and break that isolation before it actually stops them getting the help they need. So just having that lived experience, I was able to, over 40 guys came up to me and said, do you remember that conversation we had? And I'd kind of nod, but I wouldn't really, because I spoke to hundreds of people. But I'm like, yeah, not really, but yeah. And he says, well, that conversation stopped me from necking myself. I remember one guy, he was on his way to his car and he was just sort of walking slow. And I'm like, hey, am I going to see you next week? And he stopped and he paused and he looked back at me and he said, yeah, you'll see me next week. I didn't know he was walking to his car and he had everything he's needed to hook the exhaust up to his windscreen and kill himself. All right. And it was just that stupid throwaway line. All right. So that was something I got so much from, and I was so fortunate that the Mates for Mates charity at that time were so very supportive, because I was getting results. I was backing it up with data, and we were really making a difference. Now, unfortunately, and that's good, right? Great. I'm proud of those efforts, but something that I did, and I know a lot of people do, is that when you help someone else, it is an incredible opiate. And by that fancy word, I mean, helping others can be like taking a Panadol for a broken leg. It makes you feel better, even though you're feeling like shit. I'm feeling shit, but it makes me feel good helping others. That's great. So helping others became my drug. All right. And what I didn't know was pretty much every 7 weeks exactly, I would have to write myself off drunk for 3 days, just rotten drunk. And I wasn't doing it because I wanted alcohol. I just noticed that alcohol, it reset my hard drive. It helped me shed all the things I was accumulating and just start over again. So it was like rebirthing myself, drinking all this alcohol, feeling shit for a bit, then coming back, and then it's like I've left all that crap behind. So, and that was my inverted commas management plan, for doing all this stuff, because you got to remember, it's one thing to have someone say, that conversation, I would have, and then, we did lose people. Was it that phone call I missed? Was it that conversation I didn't pick up on? Was it that hint that he made that I didn't pick up on? So it was incredibly rewarding, but I had no way to self-regulate correctly. And I didn't trust psychologists because I had some very bad experiences. So I wasn't getting the help I needed. And the good news and bad news about getting healing, firstly, the good news is that when you find the right healer, healing takes far less time than you think. You think it takes 5 years? No, it can take as little as 5 minutes with the right healer, and healers are often in really odd shapes and in odd places. So one of my mates knew a guy, and he said, this guy is kind of the Yoda of psychologists. He looks weird, to be honest. He carries himself weird, but he's a fucking genius, and he's incredibly powerful. He was a psych for over 45 years, and 35 of those he was working with veterans. He was largely rejected by the mainstream, but he worked with veterans because he was incredibly effective. And to me, if you can work with a hardcore veteran, that's a pretty hard nut to crack. Then, you know, you've got a good chance. That's a good indication you're onto some powerful material. So anyway, I sought this guy out. He was retired, and I said, look, I'll pay you cash, mate. I'm kind of desperate here. And part of me hopes he doesn't hear this, but there's a good story. I go to his house. He just looks like a disheveled old Yoda, literally. You know, I think if Star Wars had a subconscious message that, you know, powerful people come in odd shapes, you know. So I was sort of dismissive of him, but then when he starts talking, I could see there was something more there. And then at the 3-month mark, he could see that, and you know, his house was a mess, probably smell a bit of cat's piss, you know, if I'm being honest. But it kind of helped me relax because, you know, he wasn't taking electric notes on an iPad that could be, you know, filtered out. It was a very secure place, right? And I was able to open up, and when he realized that, you know, okay, I'm trusting this guy, which is about at 3-month mark, he showed me these techniques that basically he showed me how to do these movements to rearrange the rods and cones in my eyes, because I'd been in fight or flight for so long that my pupils and the rods and cones inside my pupils were lined up to see life in 2 colors, safe and not safe. And that's how I was wired. Because your eyes are so close to your brain, it's continually feeding information back to your brain that it's either safe or not safe. And so your brain is in fight or flight. And, you know, imagine if you could grab a dog's tail and wag it and it becomes happy. You stick it between its legs and it becomes set and, you know, scared. This is what the eyes do. So he showed me how to literally change the way the rods and cones are lined up. And then that fed a very different message back to my brain. And then he gets me to sit down. He says, right, check in with your body. And I'm like, holy shit, I can actually feel myself from the neck down. Because when I was in fight or flight, I was so focused on what was outside of me, I was disconnected to what was going on inside of me. And for the first time, I felt this rush of sensation into my body. And I'm like, crap, I've got a lot of tension in my stomach. You know, I'm going to relax that. And I relaxed it. Oh, and now I can actually feel my hands and feet. I didn't know that they were numb. And then he takes me outside and I'm like, holy crap, look at that beautiful tree. I never knew that tree was so freaking, and look at the detail in it. Because before, when it was just in the color of safe and not safe, I couldn't see beauty. And what a terrible thing to live without. And, you know, that simple act of kindness from this old dude, and I had to give up my own idea of what I thought was, you know, a healer, put me into a space to, I introduced that technique to thousands of other veterans. And literally just today, I did a workshop at Enoggera here at 6RAR, where I showed the guys the eye techniques and how to rearrange the rods and cones. And I was able to invite this guy along. And at one point I was saying how it's, you know, hard to find good healers and they come in odd shapes. And I actually had to describe to the group how this man was described to me. But then I said, you know, I got him to stand up and we all gave him a clap for the work he did. It was quite a moment, and it's quite fortuitous to have this podcast today. And literally this morning, I'm out at 6RAR presenting to a bunch of, you know, junior leaders and showing them stuff that is going to help them and anyone under their command, because anyone can do this stuff. It's quite a simple thing, but it's just. I was driving out of there. And I remember seeing they've got a chapel on the on the driveway, and there was a cross out the front, and I had my mate in the psychologist, retired, 80 plus odd years old, and I'm driving out of there, and I see this chapel, and I'm like, maybe God's got a plan in this. Maybe I went through all that stuff so I could meet this healer, so then I could bring it to, all these people that are currently in the system, and, I was speaking to the hierarchy post event just this evening, and they were like, everybody got so much from that, and, it's sort of mind boggling to think that all that came out of some pretty dark times, and to be able to be in a space where you can really speak into people's lives, and people pick up on sincerity. They really do. And I did a bunch of things. I'm not always the best presenter, but there was a bunch of things I could have done better, but because I was genuinely sincere in everything I said, I meant, they really got the groove of what we were trying to achieve, and they took it all on board. So it was, and then we've got this podcast, right, where we were literally talking about going full circle. So from this place of, because I was about to kill someone for free, and it was a psychologist. I just told him about all the shit I'd seen during my service, and right at the end, because this guy wasn't just, terrible at his job, he was apathetic, right? And that was pissing me off. But then at the end of it, after I'd told him all the stuff that had happened during service, he says, "Oh, so do you think it was a problem with your mum and dad?" And I literally, and this goes dark here, so warning, I literally saw his psychology degree behind him in a glass pane, and I saw myself feeding it to him. And I saw myself doing everyone a favor, because I'm sparing them from the pain that I've had to go through with this ignorant, apathetic piece of crap that I was paying $300 to see. And that's when I had to stop and go, if I'm the strongest guy I know and I'm struggling, I have to find a way for others if this is what other people are up against, And then I said, I've got to dedicate my life to this. And then it sort of flowed on from there. And it helped me be of service to others better, because it's not nice to talk about the dark places you go when you're in that state, and you certainly don't want to burden others with it. But if you can break someone's isolation by sharing with them genuine experiences, all of a sudden they realize they're not the only ones, and that if they can make a way forward for them, they can make a way forward for others. So if there's anyone listening to this and you're feeling a connection to it, I really encourage you to ask that question. How many, and regardless of what you're going through, it doesn't really matter what it is, ask yourself the question, how many other people are going through what you're going through? And see that they're just wandering around lost, thinking it's just a normal thing to experience this, and it's a normal thing to feel shit, and it's a normal thing to abuse substance. And if you can find a way forward for you, you're going to be able to find a way forward for so many other people, and if you're getting anything from this right now, listeners, you were there with me, willing me on when I was about to kill that guy 10 years ago.
And I'm just taking a moment, Tim, I've just taken that in because you're right. You've come full circle, mate. You really have. And the work you're doing now is so important and so it's so. And I'm going to ask you this, and I'm going to say now, looking back at your military career for what through all the trauma and everything that you went through, and then what you went through after your service, is this more gratifying now, the work that you're doing with veterans, and not just veterans? And I'll say anyone who's struggling with mental health. Is this more gratifying now than the work that you did when you were serving our country?
When I was serving my country, that was a very total experience. You know, it was a privilege to be in those spaces where nothing else mattered. But these days, there is a certain depth of gratification that only comes from having those experiences where you feel like you're pushed into the depths and you can reach other people that are in those depths. Now, you might have heard before, I don't like to use the word help because to me, help is a physical action. So if I was burning in my car and you pulled me out, you've helped me because that's a physical action. Let's say I'm walking along the street and you go, "Hey, Tim, I want to help you. Here's $100. I'm like, "Thanks, Adam. That has helped me." And then I go and buy some booze, crash my car, and I'm in a burning wreck again. All right. How you help somebody, I don't think you can help anyone as much as you can't change anyone. And I used to say that, you know, all you can do for people is plant positive seeds of thought and then create environments where they can grow. These days, I simply work off the assumption that every single freaking human has seeds of greatness in them already. They already have everything they need. They just require the right amount of energy in their life for that to grow. Now, this is where you can see the healing journey within context. Okay. Some people think the journey is healing. The journey is actually germinating those seeds of greatness, those unique seeds of greatness that are in line with you, and they can't be grown unless you get the appropriate amount of healing. Because healing being things, if you're not, let's say you're trying to fill a tank and you've got holes in it where the water's running out, it's almost impossible to fill the tank. You've got to block up those drainage points. Okay. Parts of us that need healing and we're not getting healing for them. It's like a hole in the tank where the energy runs out. Okay. So the goal, yes, you've got to plug those holes, but the goal is to fill the tank and then make it overflow into other people's lives, because we can't overflow into other people's lives. In fact, it's very hard. If you're wasting a lot of energy with your own healing, just like me, you know, I could still be effective and tell myself I was effective, but every 6-7 weeks I had to write myself off with alcohol. You know, there was holes in my tank that I wasn't admitting I needed fixing. And I just thought I'll just keep pouring more energy into my tank by helping others. And that makes me feel good. All right. So as much as healing is important, it's not actually the goal. It's a step in the process of germinating those seeds of greatness inside of you, doing the things that you were put on earth here to do, the things that are unique to you. And the thing is, if you don't get to that point in your life, and you can, you know, write yourself off saying, "Oh, I can do whatever." If you don't do it in your life, you're passing it down to the next generation to figure it out. Okay. So my goal is I want to move myself as far forward as possible, so other people and the next generation can then move that torch forward a little bit more. And I don't want to talk about it like it's hard work. I want to be able to say, you know, it's enjoyable, it's fun, but it's not enjoyable and fun if I've got parts of me that need healing and are causing me daily pain. So people do need healing, yes, but it is simply the first step. But that healing process, I we will need to include some links afterwards, because I have created a video, and it was basically all the content that helped me save all those guys from suicide on how to start their healing journey. Because everyone says, yeah, you need healing, but what exactly do you do when you start your healing journey? This is the part that's not on the spreadsheet right now, and this is the part that I'll send you the links. I think I might have sent them already, but include them in this session, because then
mate.
that will help people understand how to get started, because no one talks about this. I never heard anyone talk about this. So I made those videos. You know, they're very amateur, but the content is very powerful, and I very much stand by them. So I encourage you to have a look at that, and that will get you set up correctly, because, you know, no one tells you that healing takes far less time than you think. The thing that takes time is investing the time in finding the right healer, because when you're in a state of fatigue, you can, and you had a bad experience with a healer, you never want to do that again. All right. And you end up going to the healer because, it'll keep the misses off my back, or I think it's the right thing to do. I can tell myself I tried, but I didn't really. So, yeah.
So, Tim, you in 2000, it's a very key point you touch on, because I know myself that it took me 3.5 years to find a good psychologist, one that resonated with me. And once I did find that right psychologist, it was life-changing. Like you're saying, life-changing. And it's, if I say it to anyone out there, guys, whatever you do, find what works for you. Find the right healer, exactly what Tim said. Find the right healer, and your life can change. And Tim, in 2019, you wrote your book. You wrote your book called Fight, Flight, or Feel.
Yep.
How did this come about, and was it cathartic for you to finally get what had happened to you in your life into words?
Well, that came about because I was doing some great work at Mates for Mates, but the success of Mates for Mates, I believe, fractured its team focus. Okay. I could be incredibly effective provided everyone was focused on the needs of the people coming through the door and seeing it from their perspective. But when we had this, great success, and we had more people coming on board, they didn't all share that vision, and they weren't all equipped. And I found myself struggling with middle-level management, not having that vision of, we have to see it from their perspective. And if we don't, we can prove numbers that look good on spreadsheets, but these people are going to know that there's a disconnect in our hearts, because that's what they're very sensitive to. And I was at the stage of flipping the desk and knocking the boss out, because, that was my baby, right? And then I stopped myself. I'm like, that's just a cliche. That is just a cliche. So I got out of that. And I thought, well, people have been telling me the years to write a book. And I'm like, okay, I'll just start writing. Okay. And as a dyslexic, it's not the easiest thing. Some ways it was harder than Special Forces selection, but
and I'm going through the process now, Tim, and I know exactly what it's like.
Yeah, no, nothing like a good mind vomit, and you got to vomit like 10 times before you get a nugget of gold. But that's the process. It's a purging process, and so anyway, as much as I struggled with it, there's something that seems so right about just tapping away on this stupid keyboard. I'm used to being at the coalface, helping people, off the edge of, suicide and all these other crazy things. And then here I was tapping away, but it genuinely felt like something very powerful was happening. And I'm just going to stay with this empowered feeling, even though some days you don't even know what the hell you're doing. And I wrote this book. So if anyone picks up the book, they'll see that it's written very differently. So as a dyslexic, if I look at a page of uniform print, the whole thing spins, right? So I've broken the page up in different patterns, and I've got bold writing so that the page locks in place. And I've got extra big writing. So you can, you can flick through pages and feel like you're killing it, I would call it an easy read, but rich content.
I'll agree with that. I'll back. Sorry to cut you off, Tim. I will agree with that. I've read it, and mate, as I said to you, and I listened to it as well, and mate, it is powerful, very powerful, and very, very rich. And I will 100% back you up on that.
No, I appreciate your commendation, Adam, and it really means a lot to me that you share in the power of its content, because what I shared isn't stuff that I invented. It's stuff that I've discovered. And if I'm discovering something, then I can simply point it out. And as a dyslexic, there's like 100 things that everyone else sees that I just don't see. But then there's that one thing that I see that's like really obvious. And I'm like, doesn't anyone see that big chunk of gold? And everyone's walking around it like, like it's not there. And I'm tripping over it and hurting myself. And I'm like, what? You guys don't see this? What? And then it's like, I feel like writing the most obvious thing in the planet. And then everyone goes, wow, we never saw that. And I'm like, well, I can't ignore the fact that it has an impact. And I'm just sharing that discovery, and people pick up on it very rapidly when it's something that is discovered and shared as opposed to invented and pushed. So I felt very relaxed writing it, because I'm just like, well, this is what I discovered. This is what works. This is the pattern that just keeps happening. And if a fool like me can use it, then surely anyone can. In fact, it works in my favor if someone thinks less of me, because here I am making it work, and that shows them that it's powerful, and it works for freaking anybody if it works for that guy.
What 100%, mate. It's as you've said, it's one of the most. I often listen to it on my daily commute, because like you said, there's little bits of gold in there that are just absolutely, it's brilliant. And I thank you for writing it, mate. It's absolutely. And if people want to get a copy of that book, Tim, how do they get a copy of your book?
Oh, look, it's available on all the platforms. I'll include some free samples in the links as well. But excuse me. But one thing I'm doing, I mean, when I do workshops, the books are for sale as well. So, if there's any, I'm leaning towards military bases. So if there's any military bases out there that want, workshops on, resilience, wellness, and get some real-time tools, that actually work when you need them, and you remember them a week later, a year later, 10 years later, bring me on board. Reach out to me, and like I said, I always sell my book through my seminars, but it's on all the different platforms, Audible, Kindle, whatever it is. So it's out there. Yeah, it's out there. I just I like to. I'm kind of old-fashioned. I like to sort of see people when I give them the book and I sign it for them and all that. But if people want to buy it, it's online, all the different platforms. But
So Tim, you've just mentioned that. So how do people get you involved in speaking engagements, or how do they get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, you can go through my website, yourcommando.com, and I'm happy for you to include my email in this one. That's fine, no problem at all.
So Tim, just lastly, I want to ask you this question, and I want you to answer it truthfully, and so looking back now, mate, with what you've been through in your life, what would you say to your 18-year-old self with everything that's happened? What advice would you give to your 18-year-old self, and would you be enough? Would you tell your 18-year-old self you're enough, and it was worth the journey that you've gone through and the struggles to get to this point now?
Part of me says, looking at my 18-year-old self, you're a fucking idiot. Because he was in so many ways, but he was so unstoppable. He had to do it his way and break himself doing it, and figure stuff out by just war of attrition. But if I could tell anything to my 18-year-old self, is to breathe more and to know that if you do 3 things each day, you're going to be okay. And those 3 things are: every day do 10 to 15 minutes of gratitude. Every day do 30 to 60 minutes of physicality, connecting with your body. And then do 1 act of generosity.
That's a really powerful way to finish the podcast, Tim. I think that is such great advice, especially to our younger listeners, and I feel that our younger listeners can take something away from that, because I feel that it's forgotten now, Tim, the generosity of, in today's world. It doesn't cost anything to be kind to people.
This underneath all that, and okay, my website is yourcommando.com, but I've actually just started a new company, and we're currently in the process of creating I've got a certain amount of IP, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here, but generating gratitude, physicality, and generosity in amongst the wider community. And generosity does come at a cost. Generosity begins with self-investment, self-love. Okay. So that sequence of gratitude and physicality is you connecting to your mind and body. And then out of that abundance, you connect into the bigger community with that 1 act of generosity. So that yes, it does cost nothing, but to do it easily and effortlessly, you've got to. So after all these years of trying to help people and then just writing myself off drunk every 6 or 7 weeks, I don't give of myself anymore. I give of my abundance.
I know what you're saying, Tim, and yeah, it's something that you mentioned in part 2, and yeah, I think it's a really great message. And so, Tim, I want to thank you for coming on True Blue History and sharing your story. It's one of true grit, determination, the true underdog in every sense, and I mean that in with the utmost respect, because you've come from an underdog story, and I just want to say thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for everything you do for veterans. Thank you for everything you do for people who are struggling with mental health, and just thank you so much for coming on True Blue History and sharing your story. So, Tim Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's been an absolute pleasure. And again, I think we need to acknowledge the listeners that have been with us on this part 3. It's quite a journey, and I appreciate those people who have really gotten something from this, and take it, invest in yourself, and then pay it forward. So yeah, well done.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And if you feel like supporting us, you can now via our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/True Blue History, or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/True Blue History, and check out our new website, truebluehistory.com, for more great content.